Welcome, everyone, to another episode of The Heart of Relationships. I'm your host, Sarah, and today we're diving into a topic that affects many of us in our romantic lives: emotional availability check and how to spot future faking early. Whether you're starting a new relationship or navigating through dating experiences, understanding emotional availability can really save you from a lot of heartache. I'm thrilled to have with me today Dr. Lisa Thompson, a renowned psychologist and relationship expert. Dr. Thompson, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm excited to be here. Future faking is indeed a crucial topic. It can happen when one partner promises a future together but doesn't have the emotional capacity or genuine intention to follow through. This can create a lot of confusion and disappointment. It's essential to recognize early signs to protect your emotional well-being. So, let's break this down and see how we can identify these patterns.
Absolutely. So, what are some of the common signs that someone might be engaging in future faking? For those listeners who might be unfamiliar with the term, can you elaborate on that?
Certainly, future faking often involves someone making grand promises about the future, like discussing marriage or vacations, without any concrete plans. One of the main signs is inconsistency in their words and actions. For example, they may talk about a future together but avoid making commitments. Another sign is a lack of follow-up after these grand promises. If you notice a pattern where they frequently bring up future plans but never take steps towards those plans, it might be a red flag. It's essential to listen not just to what they say but also to observe their actions.
Welcome back to our podcast on emotional availability. In part 1, we explored the concept of future faking and its impact on relationships. Today, let's dive deeper into how to recognize the signs of future faking early on. Could you outline some key behaviors that might indicate someone is not genuinely emotionally available?
Absolutely. One major sign is when someone often makes grand promises about the future without any concrete plans or actions to back them up. For instance, they might talk about moving in together or planning vacations but never initiate any steps to make it happen. Another red flag is when they focus more on the fantasy of a relationship rather than the reality of building one. It's crucial to differentiate between genuine excitement about the future and mere fantasy talk.
That's a great point. It seems like emotional availability is closely tied to actions matching words. Can you share how someone can differentiate between genuine enthusiasm for a future together and future faking?
Definitely. A key factor is consistency in behavior. If someone is genuinely invested in a future, they will show that through small, consistent actions, like making plans or discussing next steps. It's also important to observe how they react to challenges. A person who is emotionally available will work through issues together, while someone who is future faking may withdraw or change the subject when real-life problems arise. Asking open-ended questions about the future can also reveal deeper insights into their level of commitment.
Those are excellent strategies. It seems communication plays a pivotal role in understanding each other's intentions. What are some effective ways for listeners to communicate their feelings and concerns without coming off as accusatory?
Communication is key. To approach the topic sensitively, I recommend using I statements. For example, instead of saying, "You never follow through on your promises," try, "I feel anxious when we discuss the future because I need more clarity on our plans." This shifts the focus from blame to expressing personal feelings. Additionally, asking open-ended questions can encourage dialogue. Phrasing things like, "How do you envision our future together?" invites the other person to share their perspective, which can lead to a more productive discussion.
You've shared some valuable insights today. As we wrap up this segment, what final thoughts do you have for our listeners who might be navigating the murky waters of emotional availability?
My final thoughts would be to trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. Pay attention to your feelings and the overall dynamics in the relationship. It's also important to prioritize your emotional well-being. Surround yourself with supportive people who can offer perspective. Lastly, remember that it's perfectly okay to take your time in relationships. Rushing can lead to overlooking warning signs. Healthy relationships are built on trust, communication, and mutual understanding.
Welcome back to our podcast series on emotional availability. In this segment, we'll delve deeper into the concept of future faking. Now, when we talk about future faking, it's crucial to understand how it often manifests in relationships. Many individuals may present a distorted vision of the future to gain emotional control or to keep their partner invested. Can you explain the red flags that listeners should be aware of when it comes to this behavior?
Absolutely. The first red flag to look for is the inconsistency of promises. Someone who is genuinely invested will discuss plans that can be grounded in reality, while a future faker tends to make vague or grandiose claims. For instance, they might say things like, "We'll buy a house together," or "I can't wait for our future kids." But when you look into the details or timeline, there's no clarity. This ambiguity can leave you feeling hopeful yet confused, which is a classic tactic used to keep you emotionally hooked without any real commitment.
That makes a lot of sense. It's almost like a mirage, something that looks enticing but is ultimately out of reach. In addition to vague promises, are there other behaviors that can help someone identify if they're being future faked? Perhaps behaviors that could signal a lack of emotional availability?
Definitely. Another key behavior is the tendency to shift blame or avoid accountability. If someone is genuinely committed, they'll take responsibility for their actions and work alongside you to resolve conflicts. However, a future faker might deflect when things get tough, often painting themselves as the victim or making excuses. You might hear phrases like, "It's not my fault things didn't work out," or "I was just waiting for the right moment to talk about it." This pattern not only disrupts trust but also indicates that they may not be emotionally available to engage in a healthy, reciprocal relationship.
That's a critical point. Emotional availability is all about mutual engagement and accountability. As we unpack these behaviors, how can someone regain their emotional footing if they realize they've been caught in a cycle of future faking? What steps can they take to reassure themselves and reset their boundaries? Welcome back to our podcast series on emotional availability. In the last episode, we touched upon the signs of future faking and how it can impact our relationships. Today, let's dive deeper into how to recognize these behaviors early on. So, what would you say are the most common red flags that signal someone might be engaging in future faking?
Great question. One major red flag is when someone frequently talks about the future, like planning vacations or discussing life goals, but their actions don't align with those words. For instance, if they mention wanting to settle down but aren't willing to introduce you to their close friends or family, it's a warning sign. Additionally, if they use vague terms like someday or eventually, without any clear timeline, that can also be indicative of future faking.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like they're throwing out these grand ideas to keep you interested, but there's no substance behind them. How can someone differentiate between genuine ambition and future faking? Sometimes people really do have big plans that take time.
Absolutely, and that's a critical distinction to make. Genuine ambition usually comes with actionable steps. If a person is actively working towards their goals, like applying for jobs, attending networking events, or taking courses, they're likely being genuine. In contrast, a future faker might just be presenting an elaborate vision without taking any concrete actions. It's essential to have open conversations about goals, and if you notice a lack of follow-through over time, that should definitely raise some alarms.
Welcome back to our discussion on emotional availability and the phenomenon of future faking. In our previous segments, we've touched on what future faking is and how it can impact relationships. Today, I want to delve deeper into the signs we can look for to identify future faking early on. One common sign is when someone makes grand promises about the future without any concrete plans. What are your thoughts on how to differentiate between someone who is genuinely optimistic and someone who is future faking?
That's a great question. A key indicator is consistency. Genuine people will not only make promises but will also take actionable steps towards those promises. For instance, if someone frequently talks about wanting to get married or travel together but never brings it up in practical terms, like discussing locations, budgets, or timelines, it's a red flag. The disparity between their words and actions can reveal their emotional availability. It's vital to evaluate if their talk aligns with reality over time.
Absolutely. Consistency is crucial. And I think another red flag is when the person often shifts the focus on future plans to avoid discussing present issues. Have you seen this in your experience? How do you think that tactic plays into future faking?
Definitely. That's a classic manipulation tactic. It's a way of steering the conversation away from uncomfortable topics or current problems, which often leaves the other person feeling invalidated. When someone continuously redirects discussions to future plans, it can create a false sense of hope, making it difficult for the partner to address the underlying issues. It's essential for individuals to recognize the pattern and understand that a healthy, communicative relationship should be as much about addressing present realities as it is about envisioning the future.
Welcome back to our podcast on emotional availability. In this segment, we're diving deeper into the concept of future faking. Last time, we touched on how some individuals may use promises of a bright future to manipulate their partners. Can you elaborate on the psychological tactics behind this behavior, and maybe share an example?
Absolutely. Future faking often stems from a person's fear of commitment or emotional intimacy. They might promise a future, like marriage, children, or travel together, to keep their partner engaged without any real intention of following through. For instance, I once worked with someone who found herself in a relationship where her partner frequently mentioned plans for a dream vacation. It felt exciting, but as time went on, it became clear he was just using these fantasies to avoid discussing their current issues.
That's a great example. It really highlights how enticing those promises can be, but also how deceptive they are. So, what are some red flags listeners should watch for when they suspect they might be experiencing future faking?
One major red flag is inconsistency. If someone frequently changes their story about the future or backs out of plans, that's a sign they might not be serious. Another warning sign is the lack of concrete actions to support their words. For instance, if they talk about wanting to settle down but don't seem to make any effort to build a life together, it's worth questioning their sincerity. Lastly, notice how they respond when you bring up serious topics. Avoidance or defensiveness often indicates emotional unavailability.
Welcome back to our podcast. As we dive deeper into the concept of emotional availability and future faking, I'd like to revisit some examples that might help listeners identify these patterns in their own relationships. Can you share a few common phrases or promises that someone who engages in future faking might use?
Absolutely. Some of the most common phrases include, "I can see us getting married one day," or "I'll definitely move in with you soon." These statements sound promising and can create a false sense of security. However, the key is to pay attention to the actions that follow. If someone repeatedly makes grand promises but fails to take any steps toward fulfilling them, it might be a red flag.
That's an excellent point. It's crucial for listeners to monitor not only what is being said but also what is being done. This brings me to the emotional aspect. How can someone emotionally detach from the strong feelings generated by those promises? It can be challenging when feelings run deep.
It really is challenging. One effective strategy is to practice mindfulness and recognize when your feelings are being influenced by someone else's words rather than their actions. Journaling can help too. Documenting your experiences can provide clarity. It allows you to objectively analyze the relationship and spot discrepancies between promises and reality. Additionally, talking to trusted friends or a therapist can provide an external perspective, which is invaluable.
Those are great suggestions. I think many people underestimate the power of sharing their experiences. Moving on, let's discuss how someone can confront their partner if they suspect they're being future faked. What's the best approach to have that difficult conversation?
Confrontation can be tough, but it's essential for your emotional health. I recommend using I statements, such as, "I feel uncertain when I hear promises that aren't followed up with actions." This way, you're expressing your feelings without placing blame. Choose a time when both of you are calm and open to discussion. It's important to listen actively and gauge their response. If they become defensive or dismissive, that can indicate deeper issues with emotional availability.
Welcome back to our podcast series on emotional availability and identifying toxic patterns in relationships. In our previous episode, we discussed what future faking is and how it can manipulate your perception of a relationship. Today, let's dive deeper into the signs of emotional unavailability and how to recognize future faking early on. Can you start by sharing some common red flags that listeners should be aware of?
Absolutely. One major red flag is when someone consistently makes grand promises about the future but fails to follow through on even small commitments. For example, they might talk about long-term plans like traveling together or starting a family, but when it comes down to taking actionable steps, like planning a trip or discussing finances, there's always an excuse. This inconsistency is often a telltale sign that the person is emotionally unavailable and may be engaging in future faking.
That's a great point. So, what about the emotional tone during these conversations? Are there specific behaviors or patterns in communication that might indicate future faking?
Definitely. One behavior to look out for is when a partner frequently changes the subject when you bring up important topics about the future. It's almost as if they're deflecting responsibility. Additionally, if they avoid giving a direct answer or use vague language, that can signal emotional unavailability. They might agree to your future plans in a general sense but never provide the specifics. This type of vague communication can create a false sense of security, making it easier for them to keep you invested without any real commitment.
That makes a lot of sense. And I imagine that this behavior can lead to a cycle of hope and disappointment for the person on the receiving end. How can someone break that cycle and protect themselves from being caught in the future faking trap?
It's crucial to establish clear boundaries and have open, honest conversations about your needs. If you feel like you're not getting the commitment or clarity you deserve, don't be afraid to voice your concerns. Ask direct questions about their intentions and observe how they respond. If they become defensive or dismissive, that could be a sign that they are not emotionally available. Trust your instincts and be willing to walk away if the relationship continues to feel like a roller coaster of unmet expectations.
Welcome back to our podcast, where we're diving deeper into the concept of emotional availability and future faking. In our last segment, we covered some of the signs to look out for in a partner who might not be emotionally available. Now, let's explore how this kind of behavior can impact relationships over time. Can you share your thoughts on how future faking can create a cycle of hope and disappointment?
Absolutely. Future faking can be incredibly damaging because it exploits the hope of the other person. Initially, those grand promises can feel like a dream come true. You might envision a happy future together, but when those promises are repeatedly unfulfilled, it can lead to a cycle of emotional turmoil. Each time a partner fails to deliver on their commitments, it chips away at the trust and emotional safety in the relationship, leaving the other person feeling increasingly insecure and anxious.
That's a great point. It's almost like a false sense of security, which can be so confusing. Many people might find themselves questioning their reality. Was it all just a mirage? What are some strategies you suggest for individuals who find themselves in these situations, trying to navigate this emotional roller coaster?
One of the key strategies is to establish clear boundaries and communicate openly about your needs. If you notice patterns of future faking, it's crucial to address them head-on. You can ask direct questions about their intentions and gauge their reactions. Also, seek reassurance from supportive friends or a therapist. Surrounding yourself with people who validate your feelings can help you recognize the situation more clearly. Ultimately, maintaining a strong sense of self-worth is vital. Remind yourself that you deserve honesty and commitment.
That's so true. Self-worth really is the cornerstone of navigating these complex dynamics. Additionally, what role do you think self-awareness plays in recognizing future faking before it becomes a bigger issue? How can individuals cultivate that awareness in their relationships?
Self-awareness is crucial. It allows individuals to recognize their own emotional patterns and triggers. Journaling can be an effective tool for this. By writing down thoughts and feelings, individuals can identify repeating cycles in their relationships. Practicing mindfulness can also help, as it encourages one to be present and attentive to their feelings. Encourage listeners to trust their instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. By developing this self-awareness, it becomes easier to spot red flags early on, preventing future heartbreak.
It sounds like fostering self-awareness is not just about recognizing what's happening in a relationship, but also about understanding one's own emotional needs and boundaries. I think that empowerment is essential when dealing with emotionally unavailable partners. Could you elaborate on how setting boundaries can create healthier dynamics in relationships?
Setting boundaries is vital for ensuring that your emotional needs are met. When you articulate what you need in a relationship and establish clear limits, it signals to your partner that you value yourself and your time. This can often prompt a shift in the dynamic. If they respect those boundaries, it shows they may be capable of forming a healthier relationship. Conversely, if they push back against your boundaries, it's a clear indicator that they may not be emotionally available. This clarity helps avoid ambiguity and empowers you to make informed decisions about the relationship moving forward.
Welcome back to our podcast series on emotional availability checks. In our last episode, we dug deep into the concept of future faking. For those who may have missed it, future faking refers to the manipulation tactic where someone makes grand promises about the future to keep you engaged, without any real intention of following through. Today, let's discuss how we can spot these red flags early on. What are some initial signs you think listeners should watch for when they suspect they might be dealing with someone who engages in future faking?
Great question. One of the initial signs is the inconsistency in their promises. For instance, they might say things like, "In a few months, we will be traveling together," but then fail to make any concrete plans or avoid conversations about future commitments. Additionally, pay attention to the emotional intensity they bring. If they seem overly enthusiastic about the future but don't back it up with actions in the present, that's a significant red flag. People who genuinely care will be able to balance optimism about the future with realistic steps in the present.
That's an important point. It's all about that balance. Another thing I've noticed is when someone uses vague language. Instead of saying something specific, like, "Next summer, let's plan a trip to Europe," they might say, "Oh, we'll do something amazing someday." This lack of specificity can be a tactic to keep you hopeful without any genuine intention. What are your thoughts on how emotional availability ties into this? Can a lack of emotional availability contribute to future faking?
Absolutely. Emotional availability plays a crucial role. If someone is emotionally unavailable, they may resort to future faking as a way to keep you invested without actually engaging on a deeper level. They might fear intimacy or real commitment, so they use these grand promises as a way to keep you at arm's length while still benefiting from the relationship. It creates a cycle where you're constantly waiting for something that may never come, which can be incredibly draining. Recognizing emotional availability in partners is key to avoiding future faking and ensuring a healthy, fulfilling relationship.
Welcome back to our series on emotional availability. In our last segment, we touched on the concept of future faking. To recap, future faking is when someone makes grand promises about the future to keep you emotionally invested, but they have no intention of following through. Let's dive deeper into how we can spot these red flags early on. What are some key indicators that someone might be engaging in future faking, especially in the context of new relationships?
Great question. One major indicator is inconsistency in their words and actions. For instance, if someone frequently talks about their dreams of a future together but their behavior suggests otherwise, that's a significant red flag. Pay attention to whether they follow through on smaller commitments too. If they constantly bail on plans or fail to communicate, it's likely they're not genuinely invested. Look for alignment between what they say and what they actually do. It's a critical part of emotional availability.
Absolutely. Inconsistency can create a lot of confusion and emotional turmoil. Another thing I've noticed is how some people may try to rush the relationship. They might talk about moving in together or getting married very early on. How can we differentiate between someone who is genuinely excited about the relationship and someone who is just trying to manipulate our emotions with future faking?
That's a key point. Genuine excitement usually comes with a desire to build a solid foundation first. If someone rushes in to talk about the future without taking time to really know you, that's a warning sign. Healthy relationships develop at a pace that feels comfortable for both parties. Additionally, someone who is emotionally available will encourage open discussions about pace and boundaries. If they dismiss your concerns or push too hard for quick commitments, it's essential to take a step back and evaluate their intentions.
Yes, setting boundaries is crucial. It's also important to recognize the role of communication in these situations. How can individuals express their concerns about future faking without escalating tensions in the relationship? What's the best way to approach the topic?
Approaching the topic with honesty and vulnerability is key. Start by sharing your feelings rather than accusing them of future faking. For example, you might say something like, "I've noticed we talk a lot about the future, but I feel a bit unsure about our current situation." This opens the door for dialogue without putting them on the defensive. Listen to their perspective as well. Sometimes, misunderstandings can lead to miscommunication. It's about fostering a safe space for both partners to express their needs and fears while assessing whether the relationship can grow in a healthy way.
Welcome back to our ongoing discussion about emotional availability and the concept of future faking. We've talked about some key signs to look out for. Now, let's dive deeper into how these patterns manifest in relationships. Can you elaborate on the psychological motivations behind future faking, and why some individuals resort to it?
Absolutely. Future faking often stems from deep-seated fears of intimacy and commitment. Some people may have unresolved issues from past relationships that cause them to project an idealized future to keep their partner engaged without actually investing emotionally. They might have a fear of rejection or abandonment, which drives them to create a facade of a perfect future. This can also be tied to their own insecurities. By painting a rosy picture, they hope to maintain control over the relationship dynamics.
That's a fascinating perspective. So, in a way, it's not just manipulation but rather a reflection of their own struggles? How can someone begin to identify if they are being future faked, especially when those promises sound so genuine?
Exactly. It's a complex interplay. To spot future faking, one should look for inconsistencies between what is promised and what is delivered. For instance, if someone frequently talks about plans for the future but seldom follows through on even minor commitments, that's a red flag. Emotional availability can also be gauged through actions versus words. If they're not open about their feelings or constantly evade deeper conversations, it's worth questioning their sincerity. It's crucial to pay attention to patterns over time rather than isolated incidents.
That's really helpful advice. Can you talk about the importance of communication in addressing these issues? How can someone approach a partner about their concerns regarding future faking without sounding accusatory?
Communication is key. It's essential to approach the conversation with curiosity rather than confrontation. One effective strategy is to express your own feelings first. For example, you can say, "I've been feeling uncertain about our plans, and I'd love to understand where you see us going." This opens the door for dialogue without putting them on the defensive. Additionally, using "I" statements rather than "you" can soften the impact. The goal is to foster a safe space for both partners to share their thoughts and feelings honestly.
Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. We've been diving deep into emotional availability and how to effectively spot future faking. In our last segment, we touched on the signs that someone might not be entirely genuine about their intentions in a relationship. So today, I want to explore the psychological mechanisms behind why some individuals engage in future faking. What drives them to create these illusions, and how does it affect their partners?
Great question. Future faking often stems from deep-rooted psychological issues such as fear of intimacy or commitment. Some people might have unresolved trauma from past relationships, leading them to project a future that's appealing but ultimately unrealistic. They might not even realize they're doing it. This can create a cycle of emotional highs and lows for their partners, who get attached to these visions of a shared future that may never materialize.
That's really insightful. It's fascinating how these patterns can perpetuate themselves. So, what are some of the emotional impacts on the partner who's experiencing future faking? How does this behavior affect their own emotional availability?
Absolutely, it can be devastating. The partner may start to feel anxious, insecure, or even question their self-worth because they're banking on promises that never come to fruition. It can lead to a toxic cycle of hope and disappointment. Over time, they might become more guarded, making it difficult for them to be emotionally available in future relationships. Trust issues can develop, and they may find themselves reluctant to invest fully in new partners, fearing they might encounter the same situation yet again.
Welcome back to our discussion on emotional availability and the concept of future faking. Today, we're diving deeper into identifying the signs of future faking in relationships. We've talked about what it is, but how can someone differentiate between genuine intentions and manipulative promises? What should listeners look for in their partners?
That's a great question. One key sign to look for is the consistency of those future promises. If someone frequently talks about future plans but doesn't follow through with actionable steps in the present, that's a red flag. For instance, if your partner is constantly mentioning vacations or future milestones but never makes any concrete plans or shows commitment, it raises concerns. Genuine partners will want to work on building the present first, engaging in small steps that lead toward those future goals.
Absolutely. It's all about actions aligning with words. Can you elaborate on what kind of questions someone might ask their partner to gauge their emotional availability and sincerity regarding future plans?
Certainly. One effective approach is to ask open-ended questions that encourage discussion about both short-term and long-term goals. For example, asking, "What are your thoughts on where we see ourselves in the next year?" can reveal a lot. Pay attention to whether they engage with the topic or deflect it. Additionally, asking how they've dealt with commitments in the past can provide insights into their patterns. Someone who is emotionally available will typically have a history of open communication about their aspirations and accountability in relationships.
Those are really insightful tips. It sounds like establishing a foundation of trust is crucial. Could you share some strategies for listeners on how they can build that foundation while also protecting themselves from potential emotional manipulation?
Definitely. Building trust starts with open communication, where both partners can express their feelings and expectations honestly. It's important to set boundaries and be clear about what you need in a relationship. Encourage your partner to share their thoughts and feelings as well. If you feel something is off, don't hesitate to voice those concerns. Keeping a journal can also be beneficial. Writing down your feelings and observations can help you identify patterns over time. Lastly, trusting your intuition is key. If something feels wrong, it's worth exploring further.
Welcome back to our ongoing discussion on emotional availability and the concept of future faking. In our last segment, we touched on how red flags can often go unnoticed in relationships. Let's dive deeper into how someone can recognize these signs early on. What are some common strategies or indicators that might suggest a partner is engaged in future faking?
Great question. One of the key indicators is vague or grandiose promises about the future. For instance, if someone frequently talks about marriage or long-term plans but never puts forth specific details or timelines, that's a red flag. Additionally, inconsistency in their actions compared to their words can signal future faking. If they say they want to build a life together but are often emotionally unavailable or avoid commitment, it's worth taking a step back and reevaluating the relationship.
That's insightful. It seems that emotional inconsistency can be particularly telling. Can you elaborate on how someone can differentiate between genuine excitement about the future and future faking? This can be a tricky area, given how many people romanticize future plans.
Absolutely. Genuine excitement usually comes with a level of commitment and actionable steps. For example, if a partner talks about future plans but is also actively involving you in the decision-making process, like discussing where to live or planning vacations together, those are good signs. On the other hand, if the conversation is one-sided and lacks tangible actions, it's often a sign of future faking. It's essential to look for patterns over time. Someone who's truly committed will show consistency, while future fakers may fluctuate between interest and withdrawal.
That makes a lot of sense. So, if someone is starting to notice these signs, what would you recommend they do? Should they confront their partner directly about their concerns?
Confrontation can be a delicate matter. It's important to approach the conversation with an open mind and focus on how you feel rather than making accusations. Use I statements to express your feelings, such as, "I feel uncertain about our future" when plans seem vague. This way, it opens up a dialogue instead of putting them on the defensive. Also, encourage them to share their perspective. Sometimes people are unaware that their behavior is causing concern, and this conversation can lead to deeper understanding and growth.
Welcome back to our series on emotional availability. Today, we're diving deeper into the concept of future faking. Last episode, we touched on how this manipulative tactic often manifests in relationships. Let's unpack some signs that can help listeners spot future faking early on. What are some red flags they should look for?
Absolutely. One major red flag is when someone makes grandiose plans without any realistic follow-through. For instance, if a partner frequently talks about future vacations, marriage, or even having children, but their actions don't align with those words, it could indicate future faking. It's crucial to pay attention to whether their plans are just dreams or if they genuinely have intentions to make them happen.
That's a great point. So, how can listeners differentiate between genuine intentions and future faking? Are there specific behaviors that can help them gauge someone's emotional availability?
Definitely. One key behavior to observe is consistency. Someone who is emotionally available will often demonstrate reliability in both their words and actions. If they say they're interested in a future with you, they should be present and engaged in the relationship now. Look for patterns. Do they show up for you during tough times? Do they communicate openly about their feelings and expectations? If there's a consistent discord between what they say and what they do, that's a significant warning sign.
That's insightful. It sounds like communication is crucial. How should someone approach a conversation if they suspect future faking? What's the best way to express their concerns without escalating the situation?
Great question. It's vital to approach the conversation from a place of curiosity rather than accusation. Using I statements can be very effective. For example, saying, "I feel uncertain" when plans aren't followed through, opens the door for dialogue. It helps to express your feelings and observations without sounding confrontational. This approach can lead to an open discussion about both partners' emotional availability and intentions.
That makes perfect sense. By framing it positively, it can lead to constructive conversations. Lastly, let's touch on the emotional toll future faking can take on individuals. How can someone heal from the experience of being future faked?
Healing is crucial. First, it's important to acknowledge the emotional impact and validate those feelings. Journaling or speaking to a therapist can help process the experience. Also, focusing on self-care and building healthy boundaries will empower individuals moving forward. They should be cautious in future relationships, ensuring they don't fall into similar patterns again by fostering open communication from the beginning.
Welcome back to our ongoing series on emotional availability. In our previous episodes, we've discussed various aspects of emotional intelligence and connection, but today we're zeroing in on a particularly insidious issue: future faking. So, how do we spot this manipulation early on? Can you give us a brief overview, Dr. Morris?
Absolutely, and thanks for having me back. Future faking is when someone makes grand promises about the future to create a sense of commitment without having any real intention to follow through. This can manifest in relationships where one partner continuously talks about future plans, like moving in together or starting a family, without any genuine effort or timeline to make these plans a reality. The key is to look for discrepancies between what they say and what they do.
That makes a lot of sense. It's almost like a mirage that keeps you engaged without any substance. What are some red flags to look for when someone is engaging in future faking?
Great question. One major red flag is inconsistency. If someone frequently talks about future plans but their actions don't align with those words, like not making any moves to actually set those plans in motion, that's a sign. Additionally, pay attention to how they react when you bring up timelines or ask for clarification. A defensive response or a change of topic can indicate they're not genuinely committed. Lastly, if their promises seem to change frequently, it may suggest they are trying to keep you invested without any real intention.
So, it really boils down to a lack of accountability and follow-through. What are some strategies listeners can use to protect themselves from future faking?
Definitely. First, open communication is vital. Always feel empowered to ask for specifics when future plans are mentioned. If they're serious, they should be able to provide details or a timeline. Second, it's important to set personal boundaries. If you feel uncomfortable with vague promises, state your needs clearly. Lastly, trust your instincts. If something feels off, don't ignore that feeling. Your intuition often knows what your mind hasn't processed yet.
Welcome back to our podcast, everyone. We're diving deeper into emotional availability and the concept of future faking. Before we continue, let's recap what future faking really means. It's when someone makes grand promises about the future, like marriage or a life together, but they have no intention of following through. So, what are some signs that might indicate someone is engaging in this behavior?
Great question. One major sign is inconsistency in their actions versus their words. For instance, they might talk about wanting a serious relationship but then avoid discussing it or shun any questions about future plans. Another red flag is if they often keep their commitments vague. They might say things like, "We'll see where this goes," but that can indicate a reluctance to invest emotionally. It's crucial to pay attention to these inconsistencies.
Absolutely. Inconsistency can really create confusion. It's almost like emotional whiplash when someone shifts between being incredibly enthusiastic about a future and then pulling back. What about the role of emotional intimacy? How does it relate to spotting future faking?
Emotional intimacy is a vital aspect here. A person who is genuinely interested in a future with you will want to build that intimacy. They will ask you about your feelings, share their vulnerabilities, and create a safe space for open dialogue. If someone seems to be deflecting deeper conversations or avoids talking about each other's pasts and feelings, that may suggest a lack of emotional availability. It's essential to engage in those deeper discussions to gauge their authenticity and whether they are capable of a committed relationship.
Welcome back to our Emotional Availability series. Today, we're delving deeper into the concept of future faking. Before the break, we touched on signs to watch for, but I think it's crucial to explore how this behavior impacts relationships in the long run. Can you elaborate on the emotional toll future faking takes on individuals?
Absolutely. Future faking can lead to a deep sense of betrayal and disappointment. When someone consistently promises a future that never materializes, it creates a sense of false hope. This can lead to feelings of inadequacy, as the person may start questioning their worth, wondering why they weren't enough for their partner to be genuine. Over time, this can erode self-esteem and trust, not just in the partner but in future relationships as well.
That makes perfect sense. It's a cycle that can be incredibly damaging. So, what can someone do if they find themselves in a relationship where future faking is happening? Are there strategies for addressing it?
Definitely. The first step is open communication. It's essential to express your feelings about the promises being made and your need for clarity. If the partner shows genuine remorse and a willingness to change, that's a positive sign. However, if they become defensive or dismissive, it's a red flag. Another strategy is to set boundaries. For example, ask for small, actionable commitments rather than grand future promises. This can help establish realistic expectations and gauge their emotional availability.
As we wrap up our discussion on emotional availability and the red flags of future faking, let's revisit some key takeaways. One of the main points we've highlighted is the importance of being aware of how future faking can create a false sense of security in relationships. Can you elaborate on the psychological impact this can have on individuals?
Absolutely. When someone is future faking, it often leads the other person to invest emotionally in a relationship that isn't genuine. This can create a cycle of hope and disappointment, leaving individuals feeling confused and anxious. Over time, the emotional toll can lead to trust issues and difficulty in forming healthy relationships in the future. It's essential to recognize these patterns early to avoid long-term emotional damage.
That's a crucial point. So, what are some practical strategies our listeners can implement to protect themselves from this kind of emotional manipulation? How can they ensure their partners are genuinely emotionally available?
Great question. First, I recommend having open and honest conversations about expectations and future plans early in the relationship. Pay attention to how your partner responds. If they make grand promises without backing them up with action, that's a significant red flag. Additionally, building emotional intelligence, both in yourself and your partner, can foster a deeper understanding of each other's feelings, which is key to recognizing and addressing any manipulative behavior. Listening to your instincts is just as important.
Those are excellent strategies. It's all about creating a dialogue and fostering transparency in relationships. As we conclude, what final thoughts would you like to leave our listeners with regarding emotional availability and future faking?
I'd say, trust your feelings and don't ignore the signs. Emotional availability isn't just about the ability to share feelings, it's also about being consistent and reliable in actions. Surround yourself with people who respect your emotional landscape. And remember, it's okay to take your time to truly understand whether someone is right for you. Healthy relationships are built on mutual respect and understanding, so prioritize your emotional well-being in your journey.
Thank you for that insightful conclusion. This has been such an eye-opening discussion on emotional availability and the dangers of future faking. We appreciate you taking the time to share your expertise with us today. For our listeners, remember to stay vigilant and prioritize your emotional health in all aspects of your relationships. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope to have you back for more enlightening conversations.